Welcome back. Some Karens think warning signs, fences, and restricted areas are just suggestions for everyone else. Unfortunately, wild animals do not care how entitled you are. From a woman who climbed into a bear enclosure believing it was basically a petting zoo, to a Karen in New York who extended her camera through a gap in the fence, she was explicitly warned not to approach. It was March 14th, 2015. A wildlife sanctuary sat on a narrow stretch of rural road in western Tennessee, a small privately operated facility that housed several black bears in large chain-link enclosures. The property was open to the public on weekends only, with guided walking tours along a gravel path that ran parallel to the bear pens. Tammy Hutchins was 44 years old, a dental office manager from Clarksville. She had driven out alone that Saturday after seeing the sanctuary advertised on a local community board. She had no background in wildlife or animal handling, but considered herself an animal lover. She had mentioned to the front desk staff, upon arrival, that she had raised dogs her whole life and understood animals better than most people. The American black bear is the most widely distributed bear species in North America. Adult males typically weigh between 250 and 350 pounds and stand close to 3 feet at the shoulder. Their forelimbs are heavily muscled, capable of delivering strikes with enough force to fracture bone on contact. Black bears in captivity do not habituate to human presence the way domesticated animals do. Prolonged noise and direct attention from a stranger can agitate rather than calm them. Fatal attacks on humans by black bears, while uncommon, are documented and have occurred in both wild and captive settings. The tour group that morning had about a dozen people. Before setting out, a staff member walked the group through the rules. Stay behind the painted yellow line at all times. No feeding, no reaching toward the enclosures, no loud or prolonged noise directed at the animals. Tammy stood at the back and audibly scoffed when the staff member finished. She told the woman next to her that the rules were excessive and that bears were not as dangerous as people made them out to be. The group moved along the gravel path at a slow pace. The first 2 enclosures held younger bears that stayed toward the back of their pens. The third enclosure held a large adult male estimated at around 310 pounds. He was resting near the far end when the group arrived. Tammy stepped closer to the fence than anyone else and began making repeated noise directed at the bear, trying to get him to approach. The staff member told her to stop twice. Tammy said she was not touching anything and kept going. The bear rose and walked toward the fence line, drawn by the sustained noise. The rest of the group stepped back. Tammy did not. She crouched at the chain link and pushed her right arm through a gap in the lower fence panel up to her elbow, her fingers extended toward the animal. The bear reached the fence and swatted downward with its right forepaw, the claws catching her forearm and dragging it forward hard into the chain link, slamming her shoulder against the fence from the outside. She could not pull back. The bear bit down on her upper arm and shoulder where they were pressed against the fence, the jaws closing around the shoulder joint. The staff member reached her within seconds, but could not pull her free. The bear held the bite for approximately 3 to 4 seconds before releasing and stepping back. Tammy dropped to the gravel path. The shoulder joint was severely damaged, the tissue around the upper arm torn through, and the axillary artery had been compromised. A radio call went out to emergency services immediately. The nearest trauma facility was 34 miles away. A second staff member arrived within 2 minutes and applied direct pressure to the wound, but the bleeding was not controllable in the field. By the time the ambulance arrived approximately 22 minutes later, Tammy Hutchins was unresponsive. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The coroner listed the cause of death as exsanguination due to traumatic vascular injury to the right shoulder and upper arm. Contributing factors included unauthorized contact with a captive wild animal and delay in emergency response due to the facility's rural location. A personal bag recovered near the fence contained her car keys, a water bottle, and a printed copy of the sanctuary's weekend schedule. On July 22, 2016, inside Komodo National Park on Komodo Island, Indonesia, the morning heat was already rising off the dry hills by the time guided tours began moving inland from the main dock. Rangers repeated the same instructions to every incoming group: stay on the marked path, maintain indicated distances from all animals, follow ranger commands immediately. The warnings were unusually strict for a specific reason. Komodo dragons are apex predators operating freely in their own habitat, not animals exhibited at a managed distance behind barriers. Nearly every serious injury recorded inside the park had one consistent factor: a visitor moved closer than they were told to. Blythe Carlo, 51, a retired schoolteacher from Portland, Oregon, had pivoted to travel content creation in her late 40s and built a consistent online audience around destinations she described as genuinely wild and underrepresented. She had visited 4 wildlife facilities across 3 countries in the months prior and had written publicly about handling venomous reptiles at an education center in Southeast Asia. She arrived on Komodo Island with a specific objective: footage that went beyond the standard tourist walk. Before the morning tour departed, Blythe made 4 separate requests for closer and private access beyond the designated path, but each was denied by staff and the senior ranger, who told her the rules were non-negotiable regardless of media credentials or access granted at other facilities. She joined the tour. The assigned guide that morning was Fendi Kurniawan, 28. His pre-walk briefing covered distance protocols, stave signal meanings, and how the animals respond to close-range movement. Blythe took notes and asked questions throughout. Fendi later characterized those questions in his formal report as oriented toward how close the standard walk typically gets to the animals, not toward understanding the safety rationale itself. Within the first 20 minutes, she had drifted off the path twice. Fendi redirected her both times using the stave. She returned each time without argument, and within a few minutes, drifted again. His report noted that she treated each correction as a temporary pause rather than a boundary. Approximately 40 minutes into the walk, the group encountered a large adult male resting in partial shade, roughly 30 feet from the path's edge. Fendi signaled a full stop and positioned the group at the indicated observation distance. The group gathered. Blythe moved forward. Komodo dragons are the largest living lizard species on Earth, reaching up to 10 feet in length and approximately 150 pounds. They are ambush predators. They do not signal extended intent before striking at close range. Their teeth are serrated and recurved, designed to produce lacerating, tearing wounds rather than clean punctures. A significant bite opens a wound that actively resists closure. Fendi was already moving toward her when the dragon transitioned from its resting position. The animal made contact with her lower leg and drove forward, pulling. As Blythe fell, the dragon struck again, reaching the upper thigh before Fendi drove it back with the stave. The second bite tore into the upper leg with significant force, involving arterial structures and producing immediate, severe blood loss. She was unable to bear weight. Other group members had cleared the path. Fendi applied field first aid immediately, managing blood loss while calling for evacuation. A boat was summoned to transport her to a medical facility on Flores Island, a process measured in hours given the island's remoteness. By the time advanced surgical care was accessible, the blood loss from the arterial involvement had progressed beyond the point where stabilization was achievable. She died at the Flores Medical Facility. The investigation confirmed that Fendi had followed correct procedure throughout, redirected Blythe twice before the attack, and intervened immediately when it occurred. No findings were made against park staff or operations. 3 drifts, each one a small individual decision to move a few feet past the same line. The dragon did not need her to rush it. It needed her to be close enough. On the 3rd pass, she was. It was June 27, 2018, and the Texas heat shimmered over the grounds of Austin Wild Animal Sanctuary, where Sharon Mitchell was about to discover that enthusiasm doesn't replace expertise when facing a Bengal tiger. Sharon Mitchell, 46, was a pharmaceutical sales representative who had volunteered at the sanctuary for 3 months. The facility housed rescued exotic animals, former pets, and circus animals. Sharon specifically requested working with big cats despite having no professional experience, and staff quickly noticed problematic patterns. From her first week, Sharon caused problems. She argued that tigers should receive more human interaction, insisted that safety barriers created unnecessary distance, and suggested that staff were cruel for not allowing closer contact. Senior keeper Marcus Webb documented Sharon standing too close to fences, attempting to hand-feed tigers in violation of protocol, and dismissing safety warnings. On June 27th, Sharon was scheduled for feeding under Webb's direct supervision. The task involved preparing meat and delivering it via secure chutes, systems ensuring keepers never shared space with animals. The sanctuary used a strict lockout-tagout procedure. Before any enclosure access, keepers were required to visually confirm via monitors that the animal was secured in its indoor holding area, then engage a secondary lock on the outdoor access gate, requiring a key held only by senior staff. The protocol had two independent verification steps. One could fail, but both failing simultaneously was considered nearly impossible under normal operation. Webb explained the full procedure to Sharon, walked her through each step, and made clear that no part of the process was optional. But Webb had noticed over 3 months that Sharon had a habit of watching how things were done and quietly deciding she understood them better than she did. At 3:15 p.m., Webb was called away for a bear emergency. He instructed Sharon explicitly to wait until he returned and not to begin the feeding sequence under any circumstances. Sharon waited 11 minutes. Bengal tigers are the largest of the big cat species, with males reaching up to 450 pounds and over 10 feet in length. Their bite force exceeds 1,000 pounds per square inch, and their preferred killing method is a sustained grip on the back of the neck, compressing the airway and spinal structures simultaneously. What makes tigers particularly lethal in an enclosed space is their acceleration. Sharon prepared Raja's food and wheeled it to his enclosure. She checked the monitor. Raja appeared as a shape near the indoor holding area, and Sharon convinced herself that it was close enough to confirm. What she didn't know was that the camera angle had a blind spot near the indoor-outdoor partition, and Raja had moved into it. She found the secondary lock already disengaged, a staff error from an earlier shift, and interpreted it not as a warning sign, but as confirmation that the enclosure was ready. She had observed the process enough times to mimic the steps. She had never understood what the steps were actually verifying. She entered the enclosure. Raja was 40 feet away. The tiger's head lifted slowly, eyes locking onto her. There was a pause, a brief, terrible stillness, before Raja rose and began moving with the low, fluid motion of an animal that has already made its decision. Sharon turned to run. She managed 2 steps before the 450-pound tiger closed the distance and struck her from behind, driving her face first onto the concrete. His jaws clamped onto the back of her neck, the killing grip, designed to crush and compress. Sharon's screaming stopped within seconds. Webb returned, noticed she was missing, and found Raja on the monitors. The veterinary team responded immediately with a tranquilizer dart, but the first shot missed its mark, glancing off Raja's flank without delivering a full dose. A second dart was fired. The drug began to take effect, but sedating a 450-pound animal under stress takes time even under ideal conditions. Raja was not fully down. 34 minutes after Sharon had entered the enclosure. By the time staff reached her, Sharon was gone. The medical examiner determined she died from crushing neck trauma and asphyxiation. The extended time before sedation took effect had made survival impossible. She was 46 years old. It was September 28, 2017, and the late dry season had baked the landscape of Australia's Northern Territory into a palette of rust and ochre. River levels had dropped to their annual low, concentrating wildlife along shrinking waterways and making crocodile sightings virtually guaranteed for the tour operators who navigated the region's tidal rivers. Jacintha Werribee, a 51-year-old real estate broker from Melbourne, had traveled north as part of a 2-week holiday with a longtime friend. Her companion would later describe Werribee as someone who treated every interaction as a negotiation she intended to win. The pair had booked an afternoon crocodile viewing cruise aboard a flat-bottomed aluminum vessel operated by a small family-run tour company. The boat carried 10 passengers and a 2-person crew consisting of the captain, a river guide with over 15 years of experience, and a deckhand responsible for passenger safety. The captain conducted a thorough safety briefing before departure, emphasizing that passengers must remain seated at all times, that no part of the body should extend beyond the railing, and that certain tributaries were restricted due to the presence of large territorial males. Werribee began expressing dissatisfaction within the first 30 minutes. The main channel offered sightings of several basking crocodiles at distances of 40 to 60 yards, which she declared inadequate for the price she had paid. She approached the captain and demanded he navigate into a narrow side channel where a massive crocodile had been visible from the main river. The captain refused, explaining that the side channel was shallow, narrow, and home to a dominant male estimated at over 17 feet that had displayed aggressive behavior toward vessels in previous seasons. Werribee returned 10 minutes later with a second demand, informing the captain that she had paid for a premium wildlife experience and was not receiving one. She told him that if the company could not deliver what it advertised, she would ensure its operating license came under review through contacts she claimed to have in Melbourne's tourism oversight community. The captain refused again. Werribee's behavior escalated further. She accused the captain of laziness, declared the entire operation a scam, and announced loudly to the other passengers that they were all being cheated. When the deckhand approached to guide her back to her seat, Werribee shoved his hand away and warned him not to touch her. She stationed herself at the bow railing with her camera, standing despite repeated instructions to remain seated. Other passengers later confirmed the deckhand had asked her to sit down at least 4 separate times. As the boat passed the mouth of the restricted side channel on the return trip, Werribee climbed onto the lower rung of the bow railing to photograph the channel entrance, leaning her upper body well beyond the vessel's edge. The deckhand moved toward her immediately. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth, with dominant males in Australia's Northern Territory regularly exceeding 17 feet and weighing over 1,500 pounds. These apex predators possess the most powerful bite of any living animal, generating over 3,700 pounds of pressure per square inch. Their ambush strategy relies on remaining motionless near the surface, virtually invisible in murky water, before launching vertically with explosive speed. The attack sequence involves clamping onto a victim and immediately initiating a death roll, a violent spinning maneuver that disorients prey and tears tissue before the crocodile drags its victim beneath the surface to drown. The crocodile had been resting in the shallows at the channel mouth, its enormous body concealed beneath the murky brown water. Witnesses reported that the attack happened with no visible warning. The crocodile erupted from the surface, its massive jaws clamping around Werribee's right arm and shoulder. The force of the strike crushed through bone and soft tissue as the animal's weight wrenched her over the railing before the deckhand could close the distance. She hit the water, and the crocodile immediately initiated its death roll, the violent spinning pulling her beneath the surface within seconds. The water churned brown and red as passengers screamed, and the captain threw the engines into reverse. The deckhand grabbed a long aluminum pole and struck at the water repeatedly. The crocodile surfaced once, its jaws still locked around Werribee's upper body, before submerging again and moving toward the channel. Within 30 seconds, the disturbance ceased entirely. The murky surface settled back to stillness. Emergency services were contacted immediately, and a search operation involving wildlife rangers and police launched within the hour. Fragmentary remains were recovered downstream over the following 2 days, consistent with crocodile feeding and catching behavior. The dominant male was subsequently located and destroyed. The investigation confirmed that Werribee had been standing on the railing in direct violation of multiple safety instructions at the time of the attack. The captain and crew were cleared of liability, with investigators noting that repeated verbal warnings had been issued and physically rejected by the victim. It was February 8, 2018, in East Texas. The sanctuary housed retired circus and zoo animals, including 3 African elephants. The enclosure covered roughly 2 acres with open ground, scattered trees, and a water feature. A wooden rail fence stood 15 feet from the main enclosure to keep visitors at a safe distance. Judith Ramsey was 50 years old. A retired attorney from Houston, she had built substantial wealth through her former law practice and investments. She had served on the sanctuary's board for 18 months after being recruited for her business expertise and connections. Attending monthly meetings, she became increasingly involved in operational decisions and developed a particular interest in the elephants, frequently questioning staff about care protocols and visitor policies. For months, Judith pushed for changes to visitor experience policies. She argued that observation-only access was too restrictive, dismissing staff concerns as overly cautious. She suggested board members should have authority to observe animals more closely to make informed decisions. One morning, she arrived unannounced and informed staff she would conduct a personal evaluation of the elephant enclosure. The keeper on duty was a young employee who felt uncomfortable refusing a board member's instructions. The elephant involved had been rescued from a circus 5 years earlier and had a history of aggression toward handlers, including injuries that had broken bones. Sanctuary protocol required all interactions to occur from outside the enclosure, with no direct contact. Judith had been briefed on the animal's history and restrictions in prior meetings. African elephants are the largest land animals, with females typically weighing 6,000 to 8,000 pounds. Documented fatal human-elephant conflicts number in the hundreds. Former circus elephants often show unpredictable behavior due to years of stress and harsh training. Elephants can be aggressive when threatened or when humans violate their personal space. An elephant's trunk can exert tremendous crushing force, and they can move surprisingly quickly despite their size. Judith stood at the wooden rail barrier while the elephant, 30 feet away, ate hay. The other 2 elephants were in a separate section. She stepped over the rail and moved 12 feet closer to the main cable fence. The keeper called for her to stop, but she ignored the warning. The elephant turned her head, ears flaring, a clear sign of agitation. At the cable fence, now only 15 feet away, Judith extended her right arm through the gap, hand open towards the elephant. The elephant turned fully, lifted her trunk, and emitted a low rumble. The keeper ran toward her and shouted again. The elephant moved forward quickly. Judith tried to pull back, but her jacket sleeve caught on the cable. The trunk wrapped around her extended arm and coiled around her shoulder and upper torso, pulling her hard against the fence. Steel cables pressed into her chest and abdomen, and her upper body was forced partially through the gap, crushing her rib cage. The keeper grabbed her waist, but the elephant pulled harder. 3 ribs fractured, and her right shoulder dislocated as her arm was wrenched unnaturally. The elephant shifted her grip to Judith's neck and head, squeezing with crushing force. Her cervical vertebrae compressed, her trachea collapsed, and her airway was completely blocked. Judith could not breathe or make a sound. Staff struck the elephant's trunk and shouted. Other employees arrived with air horns. The elephant released after roughly 15 seconds. Judith slumped against the fence, unconscious, face dark red and purple from lack of oxygen. Staff pulled her through the fence cables and laid her on the ground. Her neck showed severe trauma with visible bruising, swelling, and deformity. Emergency responders arrived 12 minutes later. Judith had no pulse and no respiratory effort. Resuscitation attempts failed, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as asphyxiation due to crushing trauma to the neck and trachea with complete airway obstruction. Contributing factors included cervical spine injury, fractured ribs, and shoulder dislocation. The report noted the trachea had been completely crushed, resulting in death within minutes. Time of death was estimated at 3 to 4 minutes after the initial trunk constriction. Multiple regulatory agencies investigated the sanctuary. Violations were cited for inadequate enforcement of safety barriers, allowing a board member to bypass protocols, and insufficient supervision. The facility's operating license was suspended, the director resigned, and the keeper was placed on administrative leave. Judith's family filed a lawsuit against the sanctuary, which was settled out of court 11 months later for an undisclosed amount. The elephant was not euthanized and was transferred to a larger facility with more secure enclosures and stricter protocols. The sanctuary implemented a comprehensive policy prohibiting any board member, volunteer, or visitor from entering restricted areas or approaching within 25 feet of any large animal. Physical barriers were reinforced, and additional staff training was mandated. Cars were stopped bumper to bumper on a mountain road outside Brasov, Romania. It was September 17, 2016, and the Carpathian foothills were doing what they'd done every tourist season for years. Bears had wandered out of the tree line to pick through garbage left by motorists, and people had pulled over to watch. It happens so often along these roads that locals barely slow down anymore. The road had yellow warning signs in Romanian, English, German, and Hungarian. Pictograms of bears. Do not approach. Do not feed. The signs had been there for years and made no difference whatsoever. Within a few dozen feet of the road, an adult female brown bear weighing somewhere between 300 and 400 pounds sat calmly at the forest edge, working through scattered food scraps. Some tourists snapped pictures from behind open car doors. Locals walking by gave the bear plenty of room. A few of them shouted warnings at anyone drifting too close. This is the part of Romania where brown bears have become a roadside fixture. Generations of tourists feeding them from their cars have created animals that tolerate people at a distance, but will absolutely turn violent if you push into their space. It's not a predatory response, it's defensive. But when a bear that size charges from 12 feet away, the distinction doesn't matter much. Milena Kohokaru was a 28-year-old social media coordinator from Bucharest who'd driven up to the Carpathians for a long weekend. Her accounts were full of close-range wildlife selfies from previous trips, mostly deer and foxes across European parks. She'd posted her itinerary ahead of time, promising her followers content with the famous roadside bears. That promise is a detail that sticks with me. She'd already told people what she was going to do before she even got there. The content was committed to before she ever saw the bear. I think that matters more than people realize. Her friend stayed in the car and watched through the windshield. A Romanian man standing nearby yelled at her to stop. Milena waved him off without turning around. Phone held out in front of her in selfie mode, closing the distance to the bear one step at a time. She was smiling. You could see it in the way she held the phone. The animal had been watching her approach, glancing up without retreating. That tolerance is the trap. It looks like the bear is fine with you being there. What it actually means is you haven't crossed the line yet. Habituated bears have a threshold, and they don't always warn you when you're approaching it. They go from sitting still to full violence in a heartbeat, and the switch is proximity. When Milena stepped to within about 12 feet, the line moved. The bear went from stationary to full contact in a single burst. The first swipe hit her across the upper body and knocked her off her feet. The bear followed up with repeated blows from both forepaws and bit at her head and neck. The attack was brief, likely lasting only seconds, before the bear pulled back and walked into the trees. Defensive aggression. She'd made her point and left, but 30 seconds was more than enough. By the time other tourists reached Milena, the damage was obvious. Massive trauma to the head and neck. Paramedics were called, but the winding mountain road meant a long wait. She was unresponsive when the ambulance arrived and did not survive the transport to the hospital. 12 feet. I've measured that out, and it's barely 2 body lengths. She closed to within 12 feet of a wild bear, with her back to it for a selfie. And the bear gave her exactly 1 warning, which was none at all. Afterward, local officials pushed again for crackdowns on roadside feeding and garbage disposal. The same recommendation they'd made before and would make again. The bear was never pursued. She'd reacted the way any habituated bear would when pushed past its threshold. On August 8, 2016, at a private wildlife facility in Rajasthan, India, the morning visitor groups moved through designated tiger observation paths under heavy desert sunlight. The facility operated as a licensed conservation and breeding center with strict physical separation between public observation areas and a network of restricted service corridors running adjacent to the enclosures. Warning signs were posted throughout in multiple languages, and every visitor was briefed before entry. Staff-only zones were completely off-limits under all circumstances. Bengal tigers inside the complex retained the full behavioral range of their wild counterparts: territorial, acutely sensitive to unfamiliar movement in spaces associated with keeper routines, and capable of an immediate reactive response that provided no warning interval. Rowena Blackshaw, 42, a food and travel blogger from London, arrived at the facility on the morning of August 8th as part of a 3-week India content trip. She had visited 4 other animal-related destinations over the preceding weeks and had, by the time she reached Rajasthan, developed the specific confidence of someone who had pushed past enough restrictions without consequence to start treating rules as a negotiation. During the entry briefing, she asked whether media visitors had access to a closer viewing angle near the enclosures. Staff told her no. She asked whether an accompanied visit to the service corridor area could be arranged for professional content documentation. Staff told her no. She said she had been granted exactly that kind of access at 2 other facilities on this same trip, and asked whether an exception could be made. Staff confirmed it could not, and explained the operational reasons. She asked to speak to the facility director. Staff told her the director was not available that morning. She asked for a name and a callback. Staff provided the general facility contact information. She was issued a standard visitor pass and entered the property. Within 20 minutes of entering, a staff member redirected her away from an enclosure viewing barrier she had partially crossed. She had extended her camera over the top of a wall to capture a closer angle of the animals inside. She complied without confrontation, moved to the eastern viewing area, and within a short time was observed doing a version of the same thing at a different observation point. Prakash Yaluri, 29, was a facilities worker assigned to the Eastern Corridor section that day. The service corridor network ran adjacent to the large cat enclosures and was designed for controlled keeper access during scheduled maintenance and feeding windows, not public use of any kind. At one point in the corridor, a gate connected the public observation section to the restricted service passage. The gate was marked with restricted access signage in 4 languages. The repair had been logged, but had not been carried out before the public access period opened that morning. Rowena located the gate. She applied pressure. It gave way, and she entered the corridor. Prakash saw her enter from his position further along the passage and moved toward her immediately to escort her out. He advanced ahead of her position, placing himself between her and the section of the corridor running closest to the enclosure perimeter. That section contained a service access interface, a low-clearance area designed for keeper use exclusively during scheduled feeding transfers, when the tiger was separated under controlled protocol to the far side of the enclosure. No such separation had been conducted that morning. The tiger was not isolated. The service interface was within the animal's accessible range on that side of the perimeter. Bengal tigers can exceed 500 pounds and retain the full behavioral range of their wild counterparts, acute territorial awareness, and an immediate reactive response to unfamiliar movement in spaces they associate with specific keeper routines. The service corridor ran through the animal's territorial margin at exactly the point where the infrastructure was built to be closest to the enclosure. Prakash was in the enclosure-adjacent section of the corridor when the tiger responded to movement through the service interface. He sustained severe injuries to his upper body. Rowena, still near the gate she had entered through, retreated back through it and cleared the corridor. She was physically uninjured. Facility staff reached the corridor within minutes. Prakash was transported to the nearest regional hospital. He died from his injuries before stabilization was possible. He was 29 years old. The investigation confirmed the latch failure as a documented, unresolved maintenance deficiency that should have been corrected before public access opened that morning. Prakash's conduct was reviewed and confirmed entirely correct. He had identified the unauthorized entry and moved to escort the visitor out, which was exactly what his role required. He had not created the situation. Rowena was held for the duration of the investigation and subsequently deported from India. It was July 9th, 2013. The tour launched from a small private dock on the southeastern coast of Florida, about 12 miles south of Key Largo. The operation ran half-day snorkeling trips to a shallow reef system roughly a mile offshore. Water visibility that morning was around 20 feet. The reef sat in about 14 feet of water. Lori Fentress was 38 years old, a real estate agent from Coral Springs. She had booked the trip through a local tourism kiosk the evening before, last minute, after her original plans for the day fell through. She was the kind of person who treated guided tours as a loose suggestion rather than a structured activity. On the boat ride out, she complained about the life vest fitting poorly, asked the guide twice why the trip didn't go further offshore, and told another passenger that she had done this kind of thing plenty of times and didn't need someone telling her where to swim. The bull shark is one of the most aggressive shark species in the world and is responsible for a significant number of documented fatal attacks on humans. Adults typically measure between 7 and 11 feet in length and weigh between 200 and 500 pounds. Unlike most shark species, bull sharks are highly tolerant of shallow, warm, and even brackish water, making them a consistent presence in the kind of inshore reef environments used for recreational snorkeling along the Florida coast. They are highly responsive to disturbance and struggling prey signals in the water and are known to investigate disturbances aggressively, particularly in confined reef systems where prey is concentrated. The guide gave a standard briefing before entry. Stay with the group, do not chase or corner marine life, do not touch the coral, and exit the water immediately if signaled. Lori had her mask on before the briefing was finished. When the guide reminded her to wait, she told him she could hear him fine from the water and dropped in before anyone else. She separated from the group almost immediately, swimming toward a dense section of coral where a school of small reef fish had gathered. The guide called her back twice by name. She waved him off without turning around. She began kicking at the coral shelf, trying to scatter the fish and grab them with her bare hands. During this, she scraped her left palm against the coral edge, opening a shallow laceration across the base of her fingers. She did not surface to address it. The blood dispersed into the water column gradually. The guide had already begun swimming toward her when another snorkeler surfaced and signaled urgently. A bull shark estimated at 8 to 9 feet had entered the reef from the open water side and was moving in a slow circle approximately 10 feet below Lori. The guide blew his emergency whistle and kicked hard toward her. Lori had not seen the shark. She was still facing the coral when the shark made a single fast pass upward and bit into her lower left torso just above the hip. The bite was a full clamp. The shark twisted laterally and released, tearing open the left side of the abdominal wall. Lori surfaced immediately. The guide and one other snorkeler pulled her onto the boat within 2 minutes. The wound was severe, and the bleeding was immediate and heavy. Towels and a basic first aid kit were used to apply pressure, but the bleeding was not controllable on the boat. The vessel was approximately 1 mile from shore. The guide radioed ahead while pushing the boat back toward the dock at full speed. Emergency personnel met them on arrival. Lori Fentress was transported immediately. She died in surgery approximately 90 minutes after the attack. The coroner listed cause of death as hemorrhagic shock following a single traumatic shark bite to the left lateral abdomen. Contributing factors included a self-inflicted laceration that introduced blood into the water, separation from the guided group, and the presence of a bull shark in a known inshore reef environment. Evidence recovered included the guide's radio log, time-stamped entry records from the dock, and witness statements from 4 other snorkelers on the trip. It was August 9th, 2018, and the Zambezi River moved sluggishly through the broad floodplain of southern Zambia, its waters reduced by the peak dry season to a fraction of their wet season volume. The shrinking river had concentrated massive pods of hippopotamus into increasingly crowded pools and reed channels, with territorial bulls defending diminishing space against rivals and perceived threats. A small luxury safari lodge operated boat-based game viewing excursions along a stretch of river known for exceptional wildlife density. Maragine Tulliver, a 48-year-old homeowners association president from a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, had arrived at the lodge 3 days earlier as part of a guided safari package purchased through a high-end travel agency. Tulliver had already filed 2 formal complaints with the lodge manager during her 3-day stay, one regarding the temperature of her morning coffee, and another alleging that her room had not been cleaned to her specifications. The morning river excursion departed shortly after sunrise, carrying Tulliver, a retired couple from Ontario, and a lodge naturalist serving as guide. The guide, a 26-year-old local man who had grown up along the river and held certification through the National Wildlife Authority, operated a 14-foot aluminum skiff powered by a small outboard motor. He conducted a standard safety briefing, emphasizing that hippopods were to be observed from a minimum distance, that the boat would not enter any side channels where hippos were congregating, and that his navigation decisions were final. The first hour passed without incident as the guide maneuvered along the main channel, pointing out crocodiles on the banks and a distant pod of hippos, visible as dark mounds in the shallows. Tulliver expressed dissatisfaction with the distance, informing the guide that the travel agency brochure had featured photographs of hippos taken from much closer range. The guide explained that those images were likely taken with telephoto lenses and that approaching pods with calves during the dry season was extremely dangerous. Tulliver dismissed the explanation. She told the guide she had paid a substantial amount of money and expected the lodge to deliver what it had advertised. She pointed toward a shallow reed channel approximately 200 yards from the main river, where at least 15 hippos were visible, including several calves partially submerged alongside their mothers. She demanded the guide take the boat into the channel. The guide refused, explaining that the channel was shallow, narrow, and occupied by a pod that included a dominant bull he had observed displaying aggressive behavior on previous excursions. Entering that channel in a small aluminum skiff would place the boat within the bull's defended territory, with no room to maneuver if the animal charged. Tulliver's response escalated sharply. She accused the guide of being incompetent and told him she would be speaking to the lodge owner personally to ensure he was removed from guiding duties. She stated that she had connections in the international travel review industry and that a single detailed account would ensure the lodge never attracted another American client. The retired couple from Ontario attempted to intervene, but Tulliver cut them off. When the guide still did not move, Tulliver stood from her seat, stepped toward the stern, and grabbed the outboard motor's tiller arm, attempting to redirect the boat toward the channel. The guide pulled her hand away and told her firmly that touching the controls was prohibited. Tulliver sat down but continued her verbal assault, questioning the guide's qualifications and implying that his refusal was based on cowardice rather than genuine safety concerns. The lodge operated on thin margins and depended entirely on positive reviews from international guests. Previous complaints from wealthy clients had resulted in guides losing their positions. After several more minutes of sustained pressure, the guide turned the boat toward the channel. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for an estimated 500 human fatalities annually across the continent. Adult bulls weigh between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds and can reach lengths exceeding 14 feet. Despite their enormous bulk, hippos are capable of explosive movement in water, charging through shallows at speeds that outpace a swimming human. Their massive jaws can open nearly 180 degrees, revealing canine teeth exceeding 16 inches in length. Bite force exceeds 1,800 pounds per square inch, sufficient to crush bone, puncture organs, and sever limbs. Territorial bulls become extraordinarily aggressive during the dry season when shrinking water forces rival males and pods with calves into increasingly tight quarters. The guide eased the skiff into the channel at minimal speed, the shallow water barely covering the propeller. The reed banks rose on either side, narrowing the available water to approximately 20 feet across. The pod was visible ahead, dark shapes clustered in a pool where the channel widened slightly. Several heads rose above the surface, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. The dominant bull surfaced approximately 30 feet from the boat's bow. The animal was enormous, its scarred head and massive jaw indicating years of territorial dominance. Its mouth opened in a full threat display, the cavernous gape revealing worn but massive canines. The guide immediately cut the engine and began paddling backward with his hands, trying to reverse the boat out of the channel without the noise of the motor provoking a charge. The bull submerged. The guide scanned the water, unable to track the animal in the murky shallows. For several seconds, the channel was silent. The bull surfaced directly beside the skiff, its massive jaws rising from the water and clamping down on the aluminum gunnel. The force of the bite crushed the thin metal and tipped the boat violently sideways. Water poured over the low side as the boat capsized, dumping all 4 occupants into waist-deep water. The guide grabbed the nearest passenger, the retired woman, and hauled her toward the reed bank. Her husband was already scrambling through the shallows toward shore. The guide screamed at Tulliver to move toward the bank, but she had surfaced facing the wrong direction, disoriented and flailing in the shallow water less than 15 feet from where the bull had submerged. The bull charged through the shallows with terrifying speed, a wall of dark gray flesh and churning water that closed the distance before Tulliver could react. The hippo's jaws opened wide and came down on her midsection, the massive teeth puncturing her torso from both sides. The bite force crushed her ribcage, shattering bones and puncturing both lungs. The bull lifted her partially from the water, shook once with devastating force, and released. Tulliver collapsed face down in the shallows, motionless. The bull snorted, wheeled around, and retreated toward its pod. The guide and the Canadian couple reached the riverbank and remained hidden in the reeds until the pod settled. A distress call reached the lodge via the guide's handheld radio, and a rescue boat arrived approximately 40 minutes later. The crew recovered Tulliver's body from the shallows. She had died almost instantly from catastrophic bite trauma to the torso, the crushing force having collapsed her ribcage and destroyed both lungs. The investigation determined that the guide had entered a restricted waterway under sustained pressure from a client. The lodge suspended river excursions pending a safety review. The guide cooperated fully with investigators and was not charged, though he did not return to guiding work. Wildlife authorities issued a public statement emphasizing that hippopods during the dry season represent one of the most dangerous wildlife encounters in southern Africa, and that no client request justifies entering a territorial bulls-defended space. It was March 22, 2013, in upstate New York. The polar bear exhibit sat at the north end of the property, a concrete enclosure with a deep pool and artificial ice shelves. Chain-link fencing separated the public viewing area from a keeper walkway that ran behind the exhibit. Diane Pelletier, 41, was a Manhattan high school art teacher and serious wildlife photography hobbyist. She drove 3 hours to photograph a polar bear for an upcoming community art exhibition, bringing 2 cameras and a tripod. She had called the zoo twice beforehand about photography access. At the entrance, she complained the public barriers would ruin her shots and demanded access to restricted areas, citing her deadline and professional status as an educator. After a 20-minute argument, staff allowed her onto the keeper walkway with a signed liability waiver and clear instructions to stay at least 15 feet from the barrier fence. She agreed, but set up 8 feet away, waving off reminders. The 950-pound male polar bear had been pacing since morning feeding and was unusually active. Warning signs noted the animal could reach through fence gaps. Diane moved her tripod to 6 feet from the fence. The bear stopped pacing, faced her, and tracked her movements. Staff called out twice about the distance rule. She replied she knew what she was doing. The bear began moving slowly toward her. Male polar bears weigh 700 to 1,500 pounds and are among the largest land carnivores. Documented attacks between 1870 and 2014 show a significant fatality rate. With immense strength, a bite force around 1,200 100 pounds per square inch and no natural fear of humans. They are apex predators. In captivity, they may fixate on human movement and can be unpredictably aggressive, often observing before striking. Diane crouched 6 feet from the fence, extending her camera through a gap for a close-up. The bear had been watching from 12 feet away. When the lens pushed through, he moved forward in 3 strides, reaching the fence in 4 seconds. His right paw shot through the gap, claws raking across Diane's face and neck from temple to jaw. Her cheekbone fractured on impact. Blood sprayed across the concrete. She screamed and fell backward. The second strike caught her shoulder, breaking her clavicle. The bear pressed against the fence, both paws swiping through gaps. He hooked her left ankle and pulled with tremendous force, dragging her leg through the fence up to her knee. His jaws closed around her lower leg, crushing the tibia and fibula. He shook his head violently. The bear repositioned and his jaws closed around her head and neck from the left side. Teeth penetrated deeply at the temple and neck. The crushing force caused severe skull fractures and catastrophic damage. The bite lasted 4 seconds. Diane's body went limp. A staff member arrived and sprayed a fire extinguisher at the bear's face. The bear released and backed away. 50 seconds had passed since the first strike. Diane lay motionless with massive head and neck trauma. Blood pooled beneath her head. She was not breathing. Emergency responders arrived 8 minutes after the call. Diane had no pulse and was not breathing. She showed no signs of life upon assessment. Pupils were fixed and dilated, and resuscitation efforts were initiated but unsuccessful. Resuscitation efforts continued for 12 minutes before she was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as catastrophic skull fracture with severe traumatic brain injury and massive neck trauma. Multiple fractures to the temporal and parietal bones drove fragments into brain tissue. Injuries incompatible with life. Additional injuries included severe facial lacerations, a fractured clavicle, and compound fractures of the tibia and fibula with significant tissue loss. Her recovered camera contained 47 photos taken between 10:15 a.m. and 11:43 a.m. The final image showed the polar bear's face filling the frame from about 5 feet away, slightly blurred. The lens was cracked and spattered with blood. An investigation found Diane had been repeatedly warned about distance requirements, but moved closer despite instructions. Her death was ruled accidental. The facility was cited for permitting walkway access, but faced no criminal charges. The polar bear was deemed to have acted within normal behavior and was not euthanized. Diane's family later reached an undisclosed settlement with the facility. It was July 8, 2015, and the afternoon heat shimmered across the walkways of a safari park, a mid-sized wildlife facility in Southern California, where Patricia Holbrook was about to discover that some complaints end in blood. Patricia Holbrook, 52, was a successful real estate agent who had built her career on one simple principle. She always got what she wanted. She didn't tolerate incompetence and measured her worth by how quickly people responded to her demands. What Patricia didn't understand was that nature operates by different rules, ones that don't care about customer satisfaction or social status. Patricia had purchased premium VIP tour tickets for herself and her 16-year-old daughter, Emma. The tour was marketed as an intimate experience, limited to 12 guests, offering close-up observation opportunities unavailable to general admission visitors. Patricia saw this as money well spent, not for education, but for bragging rights and social media content. The group arrived at the African lion habitat around 2:30 p.m., where tour guide Michael Torres began explaining lion social structure and conservation efforts. The facility housed 6 lions, including Akili, a 450-pound male, and 5 females in a large enclosure separated from visitors. Park protocols were explicit. Guests must remain on designated viewing platforms. Photography was permitted without flash, and no attempts to touch or feed the animals were allowed under any circumstances. Patricia immediately interrupted Michael's presentation, loudly complaining that the viewing angle didn't offer good photo opportunities for her Instagram account. She demanded that Michael reposition the entire group or allow her closer access to the barrier. When Michael politely declined, citing safety regulations, Patricia's demeanor shifted to outright hostility. The situation escalated when Patricia stepped off the designated viewing platform, while Michael was answering another visitor's question. She walked past the outer standoff rail and positioned herself directly against the inner barrier, a reinforced panel with a narrow keeper access gap at one end, designed for staff to pass feeding equipment through. Michael noticed immediately and called out for her to return, explaining that the area beyond the standoff rail was strictly off-limits. Patricia ignored him. She told herself the gap was small, that the lion was resting 20 feet away, and that she just needed one good shot. She extended her iPhone through the keeper access gap, angling for a close-up. The shot wasn't good enough. She leaned further in, her shoulder pressing against the gap, her phone hand reaching deeper into the restricted space. When her daughter called from the platform for her to come back, Patricia didn't even turn around. What Patricia didn't appreciate, what most people standing outside a lion enclosure never fully internalize, is that African lions are not simply large cats. They are apex ambush predators, capable of covering 30 feet in under a second, with forepaws that can generate enough force to collapse a zebra's spine on contact. Michael radioed for security and began walking toward Patricia, telling her this was her final warning. He never finished the sentence. Achille crossed the 20 feet in seconds. The lion's paw drove through the keeper access gap with full force, but Patricia had leaned so far that it wasn't her arm that took the blow. The claws connected with her neck and upper shoulder, the hooked grip pulling her violently sideways into the barrier. Patricia made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, something shorter, cut off, before her legs gave out beneath her. Michael ran forward shouting and waving his arms while other staff arrived with air horns. The first radio call overlapped with another channel, costing a few seconds that felt much longer before the right team was dispatched. They discharged the horns repeatedly. Achille backed away. Patricia was on the ground, unresponsive. The wound at her neck was bleeding heavily, the kind of blood loss that doesn't wait. Staff applied emergency pressure dressings immediately, but the damage was severe. A claw had torn through the tissue along the side of her neck, compromising major vasculature. By the time paramedics arrived, she had lost consciousness, her breathing shallow and irregular, her pulse weak and fading. She was transported to the nearest trauma center, but the blood loss had been too rapid and too significant. Patricia Holbrook was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. She was 52 years old. It was December 14th, 2014, and a cool morning haze hung over the valleys of northern Thailand, where forested hills rose above patchwork rice paddies and small villages connected by winding two-lane roads. A small, independently operated elephant sanctuary housed 9 rescued elephants along a narrow river valley, funded primarily by modest fees from international visitors who came to observe and feed the animals under staff supervision. Corinthi Halverson, a 53-year-old self-described travel influencer from San Diego, California, had built a modest online following by documenting international trips with an emphasis on exotic animal encounters. Her content strategy relied on close contact imagery that distinguished her feed from competing travel accounts. Halverson had visited elephant operations across Thailand on 2 previous trips, both at facilities that still offered riding and direct contact. This sanctuary's recent transition to a limited contact observation model did not align with the content she had traveled to capture. Halverson arrived in the early morning accompanied by a hired local videographer. The sanctuary's head handler, a 56-year-old local man with over 30 years of experience, conducted a brief orientation explaining the facility's rules. Visitors were to remain on a designated observation platform at all times. Feeding was conducted only by staff. Direct contact between visitors and elephants was strictly prohibited due to safety concerns and the animal's rehabilitation needs. Halverson challenged the policy immediately, explaining that she had paid the same fee as visitors who had previously been allowed to hand-feed the elephants. The handler explained that the policy had changed months earlier and applied to everyone without exception. Halverson pressed further, offering to pay an additional fee for a private session with direct contact. The handler declined. She then suggested he simply look the other way, while she entered the enclosure for photographs, implying that a cash payment could make the arrangement work. The handler refused and warned her that one of the bulls had been showing signs of agitation over recent days and that the distance policy existed for precisely this reason. Halvorsen responded by speaking slowly and loudly, as though the handler could not understand English, and informed him that she had spent more time around elephants across her previous trips than most of his staff, and that his concerns were overcautious. She told him that if this was the level of service the sanctuary provided, she would make sure her followers knew exactly what kind of operation this was. Halvorsen spent the next hour on the observation platform, filming the elephants from a distance while expressing visible frustration to her videographer. Shortly before the late morning feeding, while the handler and his assistant were preparing food baskets on the far side of the compound, Halvorsen left the platform. Her videographer later confirmed she had instructed him to keep filming as she ducked under a rope barrier and walked directly into the enclosure housing a 38-year-old bull named Kun Chai, a former logging elephant weighing approximately 9,000 pounds. Staff had observed signs of early must in Kun Chai over the previous week, including increased irritability, temporal gland secretions visible as dark streaks running down his face, and aggressive posturing toward the facility's other males. The handler had discussed isolating the bull, but lacked the infrastructure to do so safely. Kun Chai was being managed through reduced human contact and increased distance protocols, the very protocols Halvorsen had just violated. Asian elephants are among the most powerful and emotionally complex animals on Earth, with adult males weighing between 8,000 and 11,000 pounds and standing up to 10 feet at the shoulder. Male elephants periodically enter must, a hormonal state characterized by surging testosterone levels that can increase aggression by orders of magnitude. During must, even elephants with decades of human contact can become unpredictably violent. Physical signs include temporal gland secretions, strong odor, and constant dribbling of urine. A single strike from an elephant's trunk can generate enough force to shatter bones, and their massive feet exert thousands of pounds of crushing pressure. Halvorsen entered the enclosure and moved toward Kun Chai, who had been pulling at vegetation along the far fence with his back to her. The bull detected her presence almost immediately, his ears shifting and his massive head turning slightly to track the approaching figure. He did not react aggressively at first, continuing to pull at branches as Halvorsen closed the distance. But when she reached approximately 15 feet, well inside the threshold that must bulls tolerate, the response was instantaneous. He spun to face her fully, ears flaring wide and trunk rising in a classic threat display. The bull's trunk swept toward Halvorsen without further pause, the powerful appendage striking her across the chest and sending her tumbling across the enclosure floor. The impact cracked her sternum and threw her nearly 10 feet. Before she could attempt to rise, Kun Chai closed the distance in 2 strides and brought his front foot down on her torso with his full weight. He shifted and struck again, driving downward a second time before stepping back. Staff rushed toward the enclosure with noisemakers and a vehicle, eventually driving the agitated bull to the far side. The handler reached Halvorsen within minutes, but the damage was catastrophic. Her rib cage had collapsed under the crushing force. The videographer had captured the attack from the observation platform. Emergency medical transport was called immediately, but the sanctuary's remote location presented a critical obstacle. The nearest hospital was over an hour away along winding mountain roads. Halvorsen lost consciousness during the journey. She was pronounced dead upon arrival. The cause of death was determined to be catastrophic crushing injuries to the chest, resulting in collapsed lungs and massive internal hemorrhaging. The investigation confirmed that Halvorsen had entered a restricted enclosure in direct violation of the sanctuary's policies and had approached a bull elephant displaying active signs of must. The handler and facility were cleared of liability. The sanctuary closed temporarily and reopened months later with reinforced barriers and mandatory escort policies. It was June 18, 2016. The Palmetto Gator Park was a small roadside attraction in central Florida, operating on a flat, open lot about 6 miles outside of Ocala. The main draw was a live alligator demonstration held twice daily in an open pit arena, a circular concrete enclosure about 30 feet across, surrounded by a low rope divider and a painted yellow boundary line approximately 8 feet from the pit edge. The facility had been running weekend demonstrations for several years under a state exotic animal exhibition permit. Bev Tyndall was 55 years old, a property manager from Orlando. She had stopped at the park on a drive back from a family gathering, bringing along her teenage nephew. She was loud from the moment she arrived, complaining to the woman at the front desk about the entry fee and asking why there wasn't a senior discount. Inside the park, she made a point of reading every posted sign out loud and commenting on each one, telling her nephew that most of the warnings were legal overreach and that facilities like this exaggerated danger to avoid liability. The American alligator is one of the largest reptile species in North America. Adult males typically measure between 10 and 14 feet in length and weigh between 500 and 800 pounds. Their bite force is estimated at around 2,900 pounds per square inch. Alligators are ambush predators. They rely on stillness and proximity, rather than pursuit and react to sudden movement or disturbance above them with speed that is consistently underestimated. The death roll is an instinctive rotational behavior used to subdue large prey and is initiated almost immediately upon securing a bite. It cannot be interrupted without direct physical intervention. The demonstration that afternoon had about 20 people in attendance. The demonstrator gave a safety rundown before bringing the animal out. Stay behind the rope divider at all times. No sudden movements, no leaning over the pit edge, and no interaction with the animal in any way. Bev stood near the front and told her nephew the rope was decorative and that the pit wall was barrier enough. A staff member standing nearby heard her and reminded her that the boundary line was mandatory. Bev nodded without looking at him. The demonstrator brought out an 11-foot male alligator on a handling lead and guided him through a standard routine along the pit floor. The animal was fully alert, not sedated or chemically managed in any way. Bev had positioned herself directly at the rope divider, with her hands resting on it. A staff member told her once more to step back behind the yellow line. She stepped back briefly, waited until the staff member moved to the other side of the crowd, then moved forward again. Approximately 12 minutes into the demonstration, the demonstrator turned to reposition the alligator away from the near wall. During the repositioning, the animal drifted toward the pit wall directly below where Bev was standing. Bev leaned forward over the pit edge to look down at it. Her upper body extended past the rope. The alligator's head was approximately 2 feet below the rim. Alligators are highly sensitive to movement and shadow from above, a response tied to aerial predator avoidance. The sudden shift in light and movement above the pit triggered a snap response. The jaws closed around Bev's left forearm just below the elbow. The pull was immediate. She was dragged over the pit edge and dropped approximately 4 feet onto the concrete pit floor. The alligator thrashed violently on contact with the ground, driving her into the concrete repeatedly. It attempted a partial roll, enough to fracture her left forearm in multiple places and slam her head and right shoulder into the floor. She lost consciousness within seconds. The demonstrator moved toward her but could not safely approach the animal without a control pole. He called for backup immediately. A second staff member entered the pit with a control pole approximately 3 minutes after the attack began. The alligator was separated from Bev and secured along the far wall. Emergency services had already been called from outside the pit. They arrived approximately 10 minutes later. Bev Tyndall was unresponsive when emergency personnel reached her. She was transported immediately, but was pronounced dead at the hospital. The coroner listed the cause of death as blunt force traumatic brain injury sustained during the death roll. A secondary finding noted a closed fracture of the left forearm, consistent with the initial bite. Contributing factors included crossing a marked safety barrier and leaning over an active enclosure during a live demonstration. The park's security camera captured the full incident from the moment Bev approached the pit edge. Written statements from 14 attendees and the demonstrator's incident report were collected as supporting evidence. It was October 12, 2017, early evening in southern Arizona at a 43-acre wildlife sanctuary located 30 miles outside a mid-sized city. The facility housed rescued exotic animals, including several big cats. The jaguar enclosure measured approximately 20 by 30 feet, enclosed by 12-foot chain-link fencing over a concrete floor. Denise Harmon, 46, was a housewife from Scottsdale married to a successful real estate developer. With substantial free time, she volunteered monthly for 2 years and had donated more than $50,000. She sat on the donor advisory board and had developed a particular fascination with the male jaguar, frequently asking staff about his history and behavior. Denise repeatedly requested private photography access, citing her donations and suggesting major donors deserved special treatment. Staff explained that safety rules applied to everyone. Frustrated, she implied her contributions might depend on special access. The director eventually allowed her into a supervised feeding observation area, still behind a secondary barrier. That evening, she arrived with a professional camera, and an intern reminded her to stay behind the barrier. The male jaguar weighed about 220 pounds, was 9 years old, rescued from illegal breeding 3 years prior, and had a history of aggression toward handlers. Feeding used a secured chute to prevent human contact. Sanctuary policy prohibited anyone within 10 feet of the enclosure. The jaguar had been fed 30 minutes earlier and was resting on a high platform. Jaguars typically weigh between 120 and 250 pounds. They possess the strongest bite force relative to body size among big cats, estimated between 1,500 and 2,000 pounds per square inch, capable of crushing bone and piercing skulls. They are ambush predators, killing with precise bites to the head or neck. In captivity, especially males, they can be territorial and unpredictable. Denise stepped beyond the secondary barrier, standing roughly 6 feet from the chain-link fence, 4 feet closer than instructed. The intern briefly left the area to retrieve cleaning supplies from a nearby shed, leaving her unsupervised for less than a minute. Alone, Denise moved closer still. From her jacket pocket, she removed a small piece of meat taken from the feeding area. She extended her right hand through a gap in the chain-link fence, holding the meat on her palm and making soft, clicking sounds. The jaguar had been watching her from about 15 feet away. When her arm passed through the fence, he rose immediately and descended from the platform. Moving low and silent along the enclosure wall, he covered the distance in seconds. As he neared, Denise pushed her arm farther through the gap. The jaguar struck with his right paw, claws extended, hooking into her wrist. With a powerful pull, he dragged her hand and forearm through the fence up to the elbow. Denise screamed and tried to yank free. His jaws clamped down on her forearm. Teeth penetrated both sides of the limb. The radius and ulna fractured under pressure. The radial artery was severed. Muscle tissue was crushed and torn. He shook his head once, worsening the damage, then shifted his bite to her hand. The metacarpal bones shattered. Several fingers were partially severed or crushed beyond recognition. Blood streamed down the fencing and pooled on the concrete floor. Approximately 30 seconds after leaving, the intern returned and saw Denise collapsed against the fence. He grabbed an air horn from the mounted emergency kit and activated it at close range. The blast startled the jaguar, who released her and backed away. Denise fell to the ground, clutching her arm. The intern applied a tourniquet high on her upper arm and called emergency services. The tourniquet slowed arterial bleeding from the forearm, but blood continued to flow heavily from the hand injuries. Paramedics arrived 11 minutes after the call. Denise was conscious but in severe shock. Her blood pressure was critically low. Her right hand was extensively mangled, with multiple fingers partially amputated. Responders initiated IV fluids, reinforced the tourniquet, applied pressure dressings, and administered pain medication before transporting her to a trauma center. During transport, her condition deteriorated despite aggressive fluid replacement and the initiation of blood transfusion. She went into hemorrhagic shock. 17 minutes into the ambulance ride, she suffered cardiac arrest. Resuscitation efforts continued en route and upon arrival at the hospital, but were unsuccessful. She was pronounced dead 34 minutes after the attack. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be exsanguination, leading to hemorrhagic shock and cardiac arrest. Severe traumatic injury to the right forearm and hand, including arterial destruction, resulted in blood loss beyond survivable limits despite intervention. Multiple regulatory agencies investigated the sanctuary. Violations were cited for allowing a donor into a restricted proximity area, inadequate supervision during the observation period, and failure to enforce established safety barriers. The facility's license was suspended for 6 months, and it was placed on probation. It was August 19, 2016, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the picnic areas of Grand Teton National Park, where Diane Crawford was about to learn that some rules exist for reasons more serious than bureaucratic convenience. Diane Crawford was a 47-year-old marketing executive from Denver who had built her identity around knowing her rights and refusing to be intimidated by what she called overzealous authorities. Her social media was filled with complaints about park rangers, restaurant staff, and anyone else who attempted to enforce rules she found inconvenient. On August 19th, Diane was vacationing with her husband Robert and their 2 children at String Lake, a popular day-use area known for frequent grizzly bear activity. Park signage throughout the area clearly warned visitors about active bears and mandated strict food storage requirements. All food, coolers, and scented items must remain in bear-proof containers or locked vehicles when not actively being consumed. The Crawford family arrived at their reserved picnic site around 11:30 a.m. Diane immediately unpacked an elaborate spread of sandwiches, fruit, chips, sodas, and a birthday cake, setting everything across the picnic table while completely ignoring the bear-proof storage locker 20 feet away. When Park Ranger Jessica Martinez approached during routine patrol and politely requested that Diane store the food properly, Diane's response was hostile. She informed Jessica that they were having a picnic, that there were picnic areas for eating, and that she had paid for park access. When Jessica explained that the family wasn't currently eating, the children were playing near the lake, Robert was photographing, Diane became increasingly aggressive. She accused Jessica of harassing paying visitors instead of doing her actual job. The confrontation escalated when Jessica mentioned the possibility of a citation. Diane pulled out her phone, began recording, and demanded Jessica's badge number. Even when Jessica's supervisor arrived and offered to help transfer the food to the bear locker, Diane refused. The Rangers eventually left after documenting the violation, warning Diane one final time. Her response was dismissive. She claimed she had been camping for 20 years without seeing a bear. At 1:15 p.m., a female grizzly bear with 2 cubs emerged from the tree line approximately 80 yards from the Crawford picnic site. What most people don't fully understand about a female grizzly with cubs is that she isn't simply protective, she is operating on a hair trigger. Grizzly bears can weigh up to 400 pounds and run 35 miles per hour, faster than any human alive. Their bite force exceeds 1,200 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a bowling ball. Robert spotted the bear first and shouted for everyone to get in the car. Diane's children ran. Robert grabbed them and moved toward the vehicle, screaming at Diane to follow. Diane froze. She stood completely still, watching the bear move through the tree line, telling herself it would veer off, that it hadn't seen them, that it was just passing through. It wasn't. As the grizzly locked onto the food spread and began moving directly toward the table, the bear huffed loudly and popped its jaws, a warning display Diane didn't recognize for what it was. Her instinct wasn't to run, it was to protect what was hers. She lunged back toward the picnic table, grabbing at the birthday cake and the cooler, shouting at the bear to go away, still convinced she could salvage the situation. The grizzly charged, covering the distance in seconds. Diane dropped the cake and turned to run, far too late. The bear struck her, from behind, with enough force to knock her face first onto the ground. The grizzly bit into Diane's upper thigh with full force, the kind of bite that doesn't release cleanly. when the bear shook her and disengaged. The damage to the tissue and vasculature in her leg was catastrophic. She raked her claws across Diane's shoulder as she retreated, then moved back toward her cubs and into the tree line. The attack lasted no more than 30 seconds. Robert had reached the car with the children and was honking continuously. The noise, combined with the bear's instinct to return to her cubs, ended the attack. Diane was conscious when Robert reached her, but the blood loss from her thigh was severe and accelerating. The femoral region had taken the worst of the bite, and the bleeding could not be controlled with pressure alone. Robert called 911 while applying his jacket to the wound, but the terrain made ground access slow, and a helicopter response to their backcountry location took time. Long enough to matter. Park rangers arrived on foot first, applying emergency trauma dressings and doing everything they could to slow the bleeding. Diane was still conscious when they reached her, her voice faint, asking about her children. By the time the helicopter landed in a nearby clearing, she had lost consciousness. She was in critical condition throughout the flight, her blood pressure dropping despite IV fluids started on scene. Diane Crawford died in the trauma center several hours after the attack. Surgeons had worked to repair the vascular damage, but the blood loss had been too extensive and the delay too long. On April 19, 2015, in the Hwange district of western Zimbabwe, the dry season bush stretched pale and open beneath a clear morning sky. Visibility across the grassland was excellent, which is exactly why walking safaris in the region operate under strict rules about distance, positioning, and movement around wildlife. In open terrain with good sightlines, trained guides have enough time to read animal behavior and route away from escalation entirely. That system works only if the people following the guide actually stop when they are told to stop. Celestia Vanbro, 48, an interior designer from Chicago, had arranged a private walking safari through a licensed operator and had been in the bush since April 16th. She had specifically requested walking format during the booking process, describing a preference for ground-level, immersive wildlife contact. During that same booking call, she had asked multiple times whether the excursion could get her closer than the standard tour, and was told the distance protocols were fixed. She asked again at check-in. She was told again. The operator assigned their most experienced walking guide to the engagement, Amukelo Sitali, 31, fully certified, with 8 years of walking safari experience in the Hwange area. By the second day, Sitali had begun radioing concerns to base camp. His documented communications, reviewed in full during the investigation, showed that Celestia was consistently advancing past his indicated stop positions, closing distance to animals beyond recommended margins, and failing to hold when he signaled. On April 17th, after a full hold near a group of warthogs, she moved toward them, and he physically repositioned between her and the animals. She told him they were warthogs, not predators, and that he was being excessive. On April 18th, while he maintained a standoff observation of a small elephant family he had not yet cleared for approach, she tried to move around him for a better camera angle. He blocked her and told her he would call the approach when he had confirmed it was safe. She told him she had been on multiple walking safaris, that she could read when an elephant was relaxed, and that she was paying for a walking safari, not a standing still safari. He told her, calmly and without escalation, that she had hired him specifically to make this call. On the morning of April 19th, conditions were clear and dry with good visibility across open ground. At approximately 7:15 a.m., Sitali identified a small elephant herd in a tree line approximately 200 feet ahead. The group included adult females and at least one calf. He signaled a full halt and indicated they should angle left, the standard protocol for a close encounter with a breeding herd, designed to give the animals space and time to move off without pressure. Celestia moved forward. African elephants are the largest land animals on Earth. Adult females regularly reach 7,000 pounds or more. At up to 25 miles per hour, a charging elephant covers open ground far faster than a human can clear it on foot. The matriarch of a breeding herd with a calf treats a direct forward approach as an immediate threat. A committed charge does not stop. Distinguishing that from a posturing mock charge, requires years of specific field experience in that terrain with those animals. Amukulo Sitali had that experience. Celestia Vanbrugh did not. Operating under a legitimate firearm-free safari protocol, guide Amukulo Sitali used trained distraction tactics to draw a charging elephant away from Celestia Vanbrugh, sacrificing himself in the process, while investigators later confirmed his actions fully matched emergency procedure and cleared both the operator and Celestia of wrongdoing. I think about Amukulo Sitali every time I go back through this case. He was 31 years old. He had been flagging this situation by radio since day 2. He redirected her over and over, and every time she treated it as temporary, as excessive caution from someone who didn't understand her level of experience. It was August 22, 2017. The dive operation ran out of a small charter company on the western coast of Oahu, Hawaii. The trip was a guided, open-water dive to a site approximately 3 miles offshore, known for its visibility and occasional large marine life sightings. The boat carried 9 divers and 2 crew that morning. Conditions were calm, and the underwater visibility was estimated at around 60 feet. Vicki Kettner was 47 years old, an interior designer from Scottsdale, Arizona, vacationing in Hawaii with her husband. She held an open water certification, but had not dived in over 3 years. She was the kind of person who treated safety briefings as formalities. On the boat ride out, she talked over the crew's pre-dive instructions, told her husband loudly that she had done this dozens of times, and waved off a crew member who asked her to pay attention to the emergency signal demonstration. The tiger shark is one of the largest predatory shark species in the world and is responsible for the second highest number of documented fatal attacks on humans after the great white. Adults typically measure between 10 and 14 feet in length and can weigh upward of 1,400 pounds. They are a well-documented presence in Hawaiian waters year-round and are known for decisive attack behavior with little preceding warning. Fatal attacks involving tiger sharks in Hawaiian waters are documented across multiple decades. The group entered the water without incident and descended to around 40 feet. The dive proceeded normally. For the first 30 minutes, Vicki had drifted towards the surface earlier than the rest of the group, ascending to around 15 feet while the others were still at depth. She was hovering near the surface when the captain, watching from the boat, spotted a large shark moving toward the dive site. He immediately deployed the recall buoy and called out to the divers nearest the surface to exit the water. The crew pulled the majority of divers aboard within 3 minutes. Vicki had surfaced fully by this point and was at the dive ladder on the stern of the boat. A crew member reached down toward her and told her to come up. She had her mask pushed up on her forehead and was looking back toward the water. She told the crew member she could see the shark and that it was not close enough to be a concern. The crew member told her again to get on the boat. She did not move. The shark had been approaching at depth and angled upward toward the surface in the final seconds. Vicki was still holding the ladder with both hands when it reached her. The bite was to her right upper thigh, just below the waterline. The shark bit and pulled laterally, stripping a large section of tissue from the outer thigh and lacerating the femoral artery. The crew member and another diver on board pulled her out of the water within 30 seconds. She was conscious when they got her onto the deck, but the bleeding was immediate and severe. 2 crew members applied direct pressure using towels and supplies from the boat's trauma kit. The femoral bleed was not controllable without surgical intervention. The boat was 3 miles from shore. The captain radioed ahead and pushed the boat to full speed towards the dock. Emergency personnel were waiting on arrival. Vicki Kettner was transported immediately, but died en route. The time between the bite and her death was estimated at under 25 minutes. The coroner listed cause of death as exsanguination due to femoral artery laceration following a shark bite to the right upper thigh. Contributing factors included refusal to exit the water after a confirmed large shark sighting, position at the surface during the shark's approach, and the distance of the dive site from emergency medical care. The captain's radio log, crew written statements, and the boat's GPS track were recovered as evidence. It was June 11, 2016, and the morning sun had already pushed temperatures into the upper 70s across the broad river valley of northwestern Wyoming. The summer tourist season was approaching its peak, with hundreds of vehicles lining the narrow roads that wound through the valley's sprawling wildlife corridor. Moose moved through the wetlands and willow thickets along the valley floor, their towering frames visible above the brush, drawing crowds of visitors who lined the roadside pullouts with cameras and phones. Galen Pratchett, a 49-year-old interior designer from Westport, Connecticut, had arrived in Wyoming 3 days earlier with her husband, Brent, 52, a senior financial consultant. The couple had booked a private cabin through a luxury travel service, paying premium rates for what Galen had described on social media as an exclusive Western wildlife experience. Galen maintained a carefully curated online presence tied to her design brand and had planned the trip around capturing content for her platforms. The Pratchetts had joined a wildlife jam along a valley road where a cow moose and her young calf fed among dense willow stands, roughly 100 yards from the pavement. A ranger was monitoring the crowd near the pullout, directing visitors to remain behind their vehicles and maintain at least 25 yards of distance from the animals. Galen exited the vehicle with a professional-grade camera and immediately moved past the line of parked cars toward the meadow. The ranger approached and instructed her to move back behind the vehicle line, explaining that moose were unpredictable and that the distance requirement existed for visitor safety. Galen dismissed his instructions, insisting that she had been photographing wildlife for years and only needed a closer shot. When the ranger repeated his directive more firmly, Galen demanded to speak with a supervisor, claiming the restriction was excessive and that other visitors the previous day had been allowed closer. The ranger explained that no such exception existed. Galen confronted the ranger again, arguing that she had not traveled across the country to be prevented from photographing wildlife. She suggested she understood animal behavior and would manage the risk herself. The ranger maintained his position and instructed her to return to the vehicles. Galen returned to the car briefly. Brent attempted to dissuade her, but she dismissed his concerns with a wave. She retrieved her camera, circled behind a line of trees that obscured the ranger's sight line, and walked directly into the meadow toward the moose feeding among the willows. She moved quickly, closing the distance to roughly 40 yards before stopping to photograph the large cow standing between her and the calf. Moose are the largest members of the deer family, with adult females weighing up to 900 pounds and standing over 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Despite their size, moose can sprint at speeds approaching 35 miles per hour and deliver powerful forward strikes with their front hooves capable of crushing bone. Cow moose are particularly aggressive in early summer while protecting calves, often charging perceived threats with little warning. Their attacks rely on overwhelming force, knocking victims down before stomping repeatedly with broad, heavy hooves. The cow detected Galen's approach and shifted her position, placing herself directly between the photographer and the calf hidden in the brush. She lowered her head and pinned her ears back, a defensive posture signaling agitation. With protective moose, the interval between warning and attack can collapse to almost nothing. Galen continued adjusting her camera position, stepping several yards closer. The charge covered the distance in seconds. Galen had no time to react before the cow lunged forward, knocking her violently to the ground. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent the camera spinning across the grass. The moose struck immediately with her front hooves, delivering powerful downward blows to Galen's torso and lower body. Witnesses later reported repeated stomping strikes as the animal trampled her while she lay on the ground. The assault caused severe chest trauma, extensive internal injuries, visible bleeding, and catastrophic damage to her lower body. After several cycles of stamping, the cow stepped back, snorting and stamping, then moved quickly toward the calf waiting in the brush. Brent and the ranger reached Galen within seconds of the moose's retreat. The ranger radioed for emergency medical assistance while attempting first aid and directing bystanders to stay back. Galen was conscious but struggling to breathe and losing responsiveness as they attempted to control visible bleeding. Emergency medical personnel and an air ambulance were dispatched, but her condition deteriorated rapidly. Emergency responders pronounced Galen Pratchett dead at the scene in the meadow grass, approximately 40 yards from a road lined with tourists. The incident report concluded that she had deliberately circumvented multiple direct instructions from park staff and entered a restricted wildlife area, approaching a cow moose with a calf well inside the recommended safety distance. It was June 3, 2014, in Glacier National Park, Montana. The trail was a popular hiking route winding through dense forest and open meadows, with sections passing through thick willow and alder thickets. That morning, rangers had temporarily closed the trail after discovering fresh grizzly bear tracks and scat during a routine patrol. Maureen Fletcher was 45 years old. She worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company in Seattle and had traveled to Montana specifically for a 4-day hiking trip. She had reserved permits and planned her itinerary months in advance. This trail was a priority for her personal hiking journal and photography collection. Maureen had moderate hiking experience, mostly on well-maintained trails in Washington state. When Maureen arrived at the trailhead in the early afternoon and saw the closure, she immediately sought out the ranger stationed nearby. She argued the closure was inconvenient, explaining she had driven 4 hours specifically for this trail. The ranger told her it could be closed for several days due to grizzly bears with cubs in the area. Maureen asked if exceptions could be made. The ranger explained that closures applied to everyone for safety reasons and firmly denied her request. Maureen returned to her vehicle and waited. When the ranger drove away to patrol another area, she ducked under the closure tape and began hiking. Closure signs warned of grizzly bear activity and a sow with cubs. Fresh bear scat had been found that morning, and claw marks were visible on trees in the first quarter-mile. Other hikers had respected the closure. Maureen was wearing earbuds and listening to music, reducing her ability to hear environmental sounds. Female grizzly bears with cubs typically weigh between 300 and 450 pounds and are highly protective of their young. Encounters with mothers and cubs are considered the most dangerous, as a female will aggressively defend her offspring against any perceived threat. She may attack if a human comes within roughly 50 to 100 yards, though the distance varies with terrain and visibility. Grizzlies can reach speeds of up to 35 miles per hour over short distances, even uphill, and can cover ground faster than any human. Attacks often involve multiple bites and powerful strikes with the front paws, which are equipped with claws up to 4 inches long. Maureen hiked quickly, covering over a mile in 35 minutes. The trail narrowed as it entered dense willow thickets. She rounded a blind corner where the trail curved sharply left and encountered a female grizzly and her 2 6-month-old cubs foraging in the thicket. The cubs were 15 feet ahead of Maureen, placing her between them and the mother. She froze upon seeing the cubs and reached up to remove her earbuds. The mother bear charged immediately from 25 feet away. The bear covered the distance in roughly 1.5 seconds, leaving Maureen no time to react. The first strike from the bear's front paw hit the left side of her head and shoulder, fracturing her jaw and cheekbone and knocking her off her feet. The bear landed on her instantly, clamping her left shoulder and upper chest in its jaws. Bone was crushed, muscle tissue torn, and Maureen was shaken by the motion. The bear then bit her torso and abdomen, puncturing the abdominal wall and damaging internal organs. Blood loss was rapid and severe. Maureen's arms moved weakly in an attempt to protect her head and face as the bear delivered additional bites to her torso, legs, and arms. The attack lasted approximately 60 to 90 seconds. The bear then dragged her 30 feet off the trail into the thicket. The cubs returned to their mother and stayed close. The bear remained near Maureen for several minutes before moving away with her cubs. Maureen was unconscious and bleeding heavily, with the torso and abdominal injuries most severe. Rangers on an evening patrol discovered Maureen's body several hours later, 30 yards off the trail, partially concealed by vegetation. She had been dead for several hours. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as exsanguination from multiple traumatic injuries, including massive internal organ damage and traumatic shock. The injuries were incompatible with survival even with immediate medical intervention. Evidence at the scene included Maureen's phone, found on the trail near the attack site. The last photo showed the trail ahead with dense vegetation. Her earbuds were near her body, still connected to the phone. Bear tracks and scat confirmed the presence of an adult female and 2 cubs. Hair and tissue samples from Maureen's clothing matched grizzly bear DNA. Wildlife officials tracked the bear family, but determined the attack was defensive, triggered by Maureen's sudden appearance between the mother and cubs. The bears were not destroyed. The trail remained closed for 2 additional weeks. Maureen's family claimed that inadequate physical barriers should have prevented trail access during closures. No legal action was pursued. The case was ruled an accidental death with contributory negligence for bypassing closure warnings and hiking in a restricted area during confirmed bear activity. It was May 12, 2014, and the morning humidity hung heavy over the boardwalks of Everglades National Park, where Carol Brennan was about to transform a children's educational trip into a nightmare that would haunt 28 fifth graders forever. Carol Brennan, 40-year-old homemaker and PTA president from Miami, who had volunteered as a parent chaperone for her daughter's class field trip. Carol had earned a reputation among teachers as someone who questioned every decision, demanded special accommodations, and frequently threatened to go to the superintendent when things didn't go her way. The Palmetto Elementary field trip covered Florida ecosystems. 28 students, 4 teachers, and 6 parent chaperones traveled to the park for a guided boardwalk tour through sawgrass marshes and cypress swamps. Before departure, park naturalist David Chen gathered all participants for a mandatory safety briefing that Carol would later ignore with fatal consequences. David's presentation was direct. The Everglades housed thousands of American alligators, apex predators extremely dangerous to humans. All participants must stay on designated boardwalks at all times, never approach the water's edge, and never attempt to touch or feed wildlife. The group began their tour along wooden boardwalks elevated above the swamp, at the observation platform overlooking a pond where several large alligators basked. David explained their behavior and capabilities to the students. Carol grew impatient with the viewing angle, wanting better photographs for her daughter's science project. While David answered student questions, Carol noticed a low water access point at the base of a maintenance ramp where the boardwalk met the shoreline, a section used by park staff, marked with a chain and a posted warning sign. Another chaperone called out for Carol to return the moment she ducked under the chain. Carol dismissed her, claiming she was fine. David turned and saw Carol crouching at the muddy shoreline, phone extended toward the water, and immediately recognized the danger. Here is what Carol did. Not know, and what David had explained on the platform minutes earlier. American alligators are not reactive predators. They are patient ones. A large alligator can remain completely motionless beneath the surface for extended periods, body temperature regulated, oxygen consumption minimal, invisible in murky water from less than 3 feet away. They don't chase, they wait, and when they strike, the movement from stillness to full bite force takes less than a second. A 12-foot male alligator was positioned in the water directly in front of Carol, somewhere between 6 and 8 feet away, invisible beneath the murky surface. The alligator struck with shocking speed, exploding from the water and clamping onto Carol's right arm. Bone cracked instantly as Carol screamed. The alligator's momentum dragged her forward off the muddy bank and into the water. She went under immediately, her scream cut off. Students and chaperones screamed in horror while David evacuated the children and radioed emergency services. Once in the water, the alligator performed its death roll, spinning to disorient and submerge its prey. Carol surfaced once, gasping, her arms still locked in the animal's jaws. She managed a single, desperate breath before the alligator pulled her under again. The water stilled. Park rangers arrived 11 minutes later and called for dive teams and wildlife officers. The alligator was located and killed. Dive teams found Carol's body lodged beneath a submerged cypress root 80 feet from the attack site. The medical examiner determined Carol died from drowning combined with traumatic injury and blood loss. The investigation confirmed she had deliberately bypassed a marked barrier, left the designated boardwalk, and positioned herself at the water's edge, despite explicit instructions. 28 children witnessed a preventable death because one adult refused to follow the rules. It was April 3rd, 2015, and the turquoise waters off a small island in the Bahamas shimmered under a cloudless morning sky. A locally owned snorkeling operation ran daily excursions along the island's western reef system, keeping groups within designated reef zones and avoiding deeper channels where larger predators patrolled. Renetta Stannard, a 46-year-old pharmaceutical sales regional manager from Atlanta, Georgia, had arrived in the Bahamas 4 days earlier for a corporate incentive trip she had organized for her top-performing sales team. Stannard had built her career through aggressive management tactics and an absolute unwillingness to accept limitations of any kind. The morning excursion included Stannard and 5 members of her sales team aboard a 24-foot center console operated by a veteran captain who had guided snorkeling trips along these reefs for over a decade. The captain conducted a standard safety briefing before departure, outlining the designated snorkeling boundaries marked by float lines and explaining that deeper water beyond the reef edge was off-limits due to the presence of bull sharks that frequented the drop-off. Stannard was dissatisfied from the moment the group entered the water. After 20 minutes, she climbed back aboard and confronted the captain, demanding he relocate the group to a spot she had seen on a travel website where snorkelers were photographed alongside large sharks. The captain explained that the location she was referencing was a controlled shark dive operation using trained guides and protective equipment, and that his snorkeling excursion was not equipped for shark encounters. Stannard dismissed his explanation, insisting that the calm conditions made it perfectly safe and that she was not paying premium prices to look at parrotfish. She informed him that she would be filing a formal complaint with the island's tourism authority and posting detailed reviews across every platform she could find, naming him personally. When the captain still refused, Stannard told him she would be contacting the boat owner directly to discuss his employment. She announced she would swim to the better water herself, since the captain clearly lacked the initiative to provide the experience she had paid for. Without waiting for a response, she put on her mask and fins and entered the water, swimming directly toward the reef edge approximately 200 yards from the anchored boat. The captain shouted for her to return. She did not look back. The reef crest dropped off sharply into a sandy channel, roughly 25 feet deep, where the water shifted from crystalline turquoise to a darker blue. Stannard crossed the float line and continued swimming along the surface above the drop-off. Bull sharks are considered among the most dangerous shark species to humans, combining aggressive temperament with a preference for shallow coastal waters where encounters are most likely. Adult females commonly reach 8 feet in length and weigh between 200 and 300 pounds. Bull sharks are territorial feeders that patrol reef edges and channel drop-offs, relying on short, explosive bursts of speed to ambush prey. Their bite force exceeds 1,300 pounds per square inch, and their serrated teeth are designed to shear through flesh and cartilage with brutal efficiency. Most bull shark attacks involve a single strike and release, though in some cases the shark will return for a second bite, particularly when the victim's thrashing triggers a renewed predatory response. The bull shark had been patrolling the channel since early morning, moving along the reef edge in a pattern consistent with territorial feeding behavior. The 8-foot female detected the rhythmic splashing of Stannard's fins from a considerable distance. The irregular surface disturbance mimicked the profile of distressed prey. The strike came from directly below. The shark's jaws clamped onto Stannard's left leg just above the knee, serrated teeth shearing through muscle and grinding against bone. The impact pulled her beneath the surface momentarily before she resurfaced, screaming and thrashing. The initial bite had already opened deep lacerations through tissue and tendon, but her violent kicking appeared to provoke a second pass. The shark released, swept past, and turned back on the same leg lower, near the calf. The serrated teeth tore through what remained of intact muscle and severed the popliteal artery, clouding the water dark red around her. The captain had seen Stannard moving beyond the reef line and was already pulling anchor when the attack began. He reached her position within 2 minutes, pulling alongside as a team member helped drag Stannard aboard. Blood poured across the deck from catastrophic wounds on her left leg. The captain fashioned a tourniquet from towline while radioing for emergency medical transport, but Stannard had stopped responding by the time the boat cleared the reef line. Renetta Stannard was pronounced dead before reaching the island clinic. The investigation confirmed that she had deliberately left the designated snorkeling area against the captain's explicit instructions and entered waters known for bull shark activity. The captain and operation were cleared of liability. It was September 6th, 2014. The Big Cat Preserve was a small, privately run facility in rural central Florida, operating on about 40 acres of fenced land. It housed several lions, 2 tigers, and a pair of cougars. Public tours ran on Saturday mornings only, limited to 20 visitors per group, led by a single handler. The property sat at the end of a long, unpaved access road, well outside the nearest town, and had been operating under a private exotic animal permit for several years. Connie Harbert was 51 years old, a retired school administrator from Gainesville. She had driven to the preserve that morning with a friend who waited near the entrance, while Connie joined the tour. She had no background in animal handling or big cat behavior, but had developed what she described to people around her as a deep appreciation for large predators. On the walk to the tour starting point, she had already asked a staff member whether visitors were ever allowed inside the enclosures. The African lion is the second largest big cat species in the world after the tiger. Adult females typically weigh between 265 and 395 pounds, with a bite force estimated at around 650 pounds per square inch. Lionesses are significantly more aggressive in the period immediately following birth and will treat any unfamiliar presence near a newborn cub as a direct threat, regardless of how that presence behaves. The handler walked the group through the rules before setting out. No loud behavior near the enclosures, stay on the marked path, no contact with any animal through the fencing, and follow all instructions immediately. Connie listened with her arms crossed. When the handler finished, she asked whether she could hold one of the cubs. The handler told her that was not possible. Connie asked why, received a brief explanation, and spent the next several minutes telling the couple beside her that the facility was being overly cautious and that big cats were not as reactive as people claimed. Midway through the tour, the handler mentioned that one of the lionesses had given birth earlier that week and that the cub was being kept in the holding area at the back of the facility. Connie immediately asked to see it. The handler declined, explained that the mother was still in an elevated protective state, and firmly redirected the group when Connie pushed back twice more. At the end of the tour, the group was walked toward the exit. Connie told her friend she needed to use the restroom and doubled back alone. A staff member was entering the holding area through a keyed side door when Connie followed closely behind him, slipping through before it closed. The holding area was a narrow interior corridor with pens running along one side. The lioness was in the third pen. The sliding gate had been left approximately 2 inches off its fully latched position following a feeding check. Earlier that morning, Connie had walked about 15 feet into the corridor before the staff member turned and saw her. He shouted at her to stop. She took 2 more steps toward the pen. The lioness hit the sliding gate with her full body weight. The gate shifted on its track, and she pushed through the gap in under 2 seconds. She struck Connie from the front and drove her to the ground. The bite came down on the back of the neck and upper spine. Connie did not get up. The staff member triggered the facility alarm from the corridor door. 2 additional staff arrived within 3 minutes, but could not enter safely. The attack lasted approximately 4 minutes before the lioness returned to the pen on her own. Emergency services were called the moment the alarm was triggered. Connie Harbert was found unresponsive on the corridor floor. She was pronounced dead before reaching a hospital. Cause of death was listed as traumatic injury to the cervical spine and brainstem. Contributing factors included unauthorized entry into a restricted holding area and an unsecured pen gate. An interior security camera captured the full sequence of events, and the facility's gate maintenance log was submitted as supporting evidence. On September 14, 2015, near the Okavango Delta in northern Botswana, the water moved quietly through the reeds just before sunrise. Mist hung low over the channels, and the only sounds came from insects, distant birds, and the soft scrape of a wooden mokoro cutting through shallow water. Marceline Thwaite, 43, a real estate broker from Savannah, Georgia, had arrived at a remote safari camp 4 days earlier as part of a guided wilderness package. The camp specialized in close-range mokoro excursions through narrow delta channels where wildlife often moved directly beside the boats. From the moment she checked in, Marceline had established the kind of presence that camp staff recognized immediately. Someone who had arrived with her own complete theory of how things worked and no interest in adjusting it. During orientation and later excursions, Marceline repeatedly questioned safari safety rules and challenged guides over restricted boundaries, arguing the protocols and marked limits were unnecessary, despite repeated instructions from staff. That evening, she approached the waterline after dark with her camera. When a staff member redirected her and told her that particular waterline was different, she thanked him and went inside. The camp's pre-departure log for the following morning included a notation about her under a shorthand used for guests, requiring additional attention. The excursion launched just after dawn, with 6 guests and lead guide Kabelo Dintle, 37, operating across 2 mokoros through a dense section of papyrus channels, known for heavy wildlife activity. Before departure, Kabelo delivered his briefing. Remain seated at all times, no camera equipment extending beyond the hull's profile, no standing or leaning regardless of what is spotted. He added one specific note that morning. The channels ahead ran alongside established basking areas, and the reed banks should be treated as live margins at all times. When Marceline said she found the seated rule difficult to work with for photography and that she had done mokoro excursions before, Kabelo acknowledged that and told her the rule was the same on this one. About 40 minutes into the excursion, Kabelo stopped the lead mokoro in a narrow papyrus channel and signaled everyone to stay low and completely still after spotting a faint disturbance along the reed bank. Movement he immediately recognized as something far more dangerous than wind or current. Nile crocodiles are among the most dangerous predators in Africa and are present throughout the Okavango Delta system in significant numbers. Adults in the delta regularly exceed 12 feet in length and can weigh upward of 900 pounds. They are ambush predators of extraordinary patience, capable of holding position just below the surface, with virtually no visible sign of their presence, eyes and nostrils barely above the waterline for extended periods. In narrow channels, they position themselves along reed banks and wait. Their strike is not a chase. It is a single, explosive lunge from stillness that closes the gap between concealment and contact in under a second. When they make contact with a target in the water, they immediately initiate a death roll, a rotational technique that disorients, incapacitates, and pulls the target below the surface. It is designed to end the encounter before it begins. Marceline saw Kabelo signal the stop. She rose partially from her seated position and lifted her camera to angle it toward the reed bank where he had been looking. Kabelo told her, in a low and direct voice, "Sit down, now." Ignoring Kabelo's warning, Marceline leaned over the front of the mokoro to extend her camera toward the water, causing the hull to dip toward the reeds where a crocodile hidden less than 4 feet away exploded from the water, dragged her into the channel in a single violent strike, and later led to a recovery operation that confirmed a fatal Nile crocodile predatory attack. Botswana wildlife authorities reviewed the incident fully. Kabelo Dintle's conduct throughout the excursion was found appropriate and entirely consistent with safari regulations. Officials noted in their summary that a direct verbal warning had been issued by the guide at the exact moment of the incident and had not been followed. What makes this case difficult to process is how little space there was between the warning and the outcome. Cabello told her to sit down. At the same moment, the crocodile was within striking range of the hull. She looked back at him, told him she was fine, and leaned toward the water. The animal had been there the entire time, invisible, waiting for exactly that movement. She gave it one. It was August 19th, 2016, on the North Carolina coast. The ocean was choppy with 3-foot waves. Water visibility was poor, less than 3 feet, due to sediment stirred up by an afternoon thunderstorm 2 hours earlier. Double red flags flew at every lifeguard station along the 2-mile stretch of beach. Tammy Vance was 44 years old. She was a stay-at-home mother of 2 from Charlotte. Her husband worked in finance, and she managed the household and family schedules. They were staying at a resort 3 blocks from the beach for a week-long vacation. This was their 4th day of the trip. Tammy had complained multiple times about weather and beach conditions interfering with her plans. When lifeguards announced the beach closure, Tammy approached the station and argued loudly. She stated she had paid for beach access as part of her resort package and dismissed the marine life warning as exaggerated. When told a shark had been spotted twice recently, she said the beach was too crowded for sharks to be a real threat. She demanded to speak to a supervisor. The beach patrol coordinator arrived and repeated the warnings. Tammy said she would be filing a complaint about her vacation being ruined. She returned to her family's beach setup and waited. During a lifeguard shift change, she saw no lifeguards in her immediate area and waded quickly into the water, moving to waist depth approximately 40 feet from shore. The double red flags had been posted since 4:30 p.m. 3 separate shark sightings had been reported by fishing boats offshore. The water was unusually murky, a condition known to increase shark activity near shore. Other beachgoers had packed up and left without complaint. The sun was low on the horizon. Feeding time for many marine predators typically occurs at dawn and dusk. Bull sharks typically measure 7 to 11 feet and weigh 200 to 500 pounds. Unlike most sharks, they can survive in both saltwater and freshwater. Considered one of the 3 species most dangerous to humans, they are responsible for many documented near-shore attacks. They are aggressive hunters, especially effective in murky, shallow water, where poor visibility increases mistaken identity strikes. Bull sharks commonly patrol coastal areas, estuaries, and river mouths, often in water less than 5 feet deep. Tammy stood in water 4 feet deep, 40 feet from the shoreline, facing toward the beach. A bull shark, approximately 7.5 feet long and weighing roughly 290 pounds, had been cruising parallel to shore in 5 to 6 feet of water. The shark detected vibrations and movement from her legs. The shark approached from behind and to her left. In the murky water, it was invisible until contact. The first bite targeted her left calf. Jaws clamped down with tremendous force. Bull sharks possess a bite force of approximately 1,350 pounds per square inch. Teeth severed the Achilles tendon completely and fractured the tibia. Muscle tissue was torn away in a roughly 8-inch section. Tammy screamed and lurched forward, trying to move toward shore. Blood poured from the wound into the water. The shark released and circled. 3 seconds later, the shark struck again, biting her left thigh 6 inches above the knee. Teeth punctured through the quadriceps muscle and severed the femoral artery. The femoral vein was also compromised. Blood loss became immediately catastrophic. Tammy collapsed forward into the water, face first. She attempted to lift her head but lacked the strength. Her arms moved weakly, trying to paddle toward shore. The shark made a third pass, biting into her lower back and side. She went limp in the water, her face submerged. Water entered her nose and mouth. She was no longer able to hold her head up or breathe. Tammy floated face down, unconscious. Blood spread in a wide pool around her body. Approximately 1 minute had passed since the first bite. 2 beachgoers about 100 feet away heard Tammy's scream and saw splashing. They ran toward the water, shouting for help as one called emergency services. Lifeguards from the nearest station reached her within 2 to 3 minutes and pulled her onto the sand. She had no pulse and was not breathing. Her left leg showed severe tissue loss from 2 bites, and her airway contained water. Resuscitation began immediately and continued after paramedics arrived, but she never regained consciousness or a pulse. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death exsanguination from a severed femoral artery, with drowning as a contributing factor, noting the arterial injury alone would have been rapidly fatal. The beach remained closed for 3 days, with increased marine patrols and additional warnings posted. The shark was never located, though injuries were consistent with a large bull shark. The case was ruled an accidental death, with her decision to enter closed waters cited as a contributing factor.